Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chris McPherson Show, the home of all your black and white on sports opinion. No grey areas here, and we're looking forward to bringing it to you very straight again this week. Certainly off the top, I'm going to be coming off the long run for a return of Maccas, Musing, and can't wait to get into that. We've got a huge show ahead of us. We've got some new guests, some returning guests. Looking forward to it all. We'll have Paul Dennett talking cricket. We're going to have Tim Robbo Robinson pulling apart the NBL and talking about what's happening in the NBL Finals Series, as well as some other great news in the basketball world. We're going to have Harry Scobie on debut, talking A-League with me, and of course, the man behind the ones and the twos. It's heating up in terms of motorsport and Formula One season. He's going to be here to preview the Australian Grand Prix, J.R. Carter. We can't wait to have a chat with him and dig into the Formula One and everything that's happening in that space. Of course, keep up to date with us across the social media channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and X, or Twitter, whatever you want to call it in this day and age. Either way, we don't mind what you call it. So long as you're following us on there, get around it, get around all of them. Make sure to, of course, on YouTube, subscribe, hit the bell as well so you can keep up to date with all of our posts as they come out. We're really appreciating all the feedback and growth that we've been getting over the last couple of weeks, especially a really good response to Lockie Bayless last week, and we look forward to bringing you some more guests in the very near future. But as I said, we've got a huge show to get into, so without any further ado, I'm going to wind it back. I'm going to get off the long run, and I'm going to get into Macca's musing. Here we go again. Victorian AFL fans losing their mind because for 5 whole minutes, the AFL world didn't revolve around them. Because the season didn't start in Melbourne with a big Victorian grand affair like it should. Give me a spell. What exactly is the problem here? If these opening round games weren't played, the AFL would magically shuffle things around to keep you happy in Melbourne. We'd lose a weekend of footy entirely, one less week of footy. Do you genuinely hate your sport that much? Are you so desperate to ensure the Victorian clubs remain the centre of attention that you'd rather cut footy weekends from the schedule than let interstate teams have a moment? And don't act like you're personally inconvenienced. What, you couldn't handle watching games from your nice, comfortable Melbourne lounge room? The shock, the horror. And then, of course, I'm sure you'll rely on the Cyclone Alfred argument. The AFL cost us games with their scheduling. They messed it up. Really? We're pretending this is something the AFL could have predicted? A cyclone hasn't hit Brisbane in 50 years. You had a better chance of seeing snow at the Gabba than a cyclone hitting at the exact time of opening round. But suddenly, now that it's convenient, it's the excuse of the week? Come on, take a look at yourselves. You can't be fair dinkum. Let's talk about the bigger picture here. The AFL and its fans want to lay claim to being a national competition. It puts itself out there as the inclusive all-Australian game, but the second anything happens that doesn't neatly fit into the Victorian bubble, their outrage machine fires up. Guess what, Melbourne and Victoria? The AFL isn't just yours anymore. It hasn't been for decades. And if the league is serious about being national, then interstate teams deserve their share of the spotlight. Not just when it's convenient for Melbourne, but as a regular part of the competition. Opening round was a success. Admittedly, 2 games, yes, but they were big crowds and they were good games. The season got rolling in style. Now we head into some blockbusters in Melbourne just as the appetite is wet in those other states. But instead of embracing the extra footy, a few Victorians had to complain. Maybe it's time Victorian footy fans accept that the game is bigger than them, because the rest of the country, we're over your whining. Well, now that I've got that all off my chest, it is time to move into Round the Grounds, and we are going to be joined by one of our returning guests. You all know him as our internal basketball guru. He's an MC, he's a commentator, he's across plenty of sports. Tim Robbo Robinson, welcome back, and pinch hitting in Around the Grounds, mate. Thank you.
Chris, thanks for having us, mate, and looking forward to having a chat with you about more sport, especially some NBL later on as well.
Yeah, looking forward to digging into the NBL in detail. It's obviously peak time, but let's kick it off. We're going to talk a little bit of golf, and don't worry about Tiger. We've got Aussie koala Karl, a youngster. He's 23 years of age. Koala Karl, rocking the Tiger Woods kit, gets his maiden PGA Tour win in Puerto Rico last weekend. And yeah, it's amazing. 23-year-old Aussie. We've obviously had quite a lot of great Aussie golfers, but it's just great to see another one coming through. And it was quite funny to see him kitted out in the full Tiger Woods design kit.
He did extremely well, didn't he? It was only his 4th start in the PGA Tour as well. So to win in his 4th start is fantastic. Put him into some great company as well throughout the PGA Tour. Only 12 players have ever won so early on in their career, which is a fantastic stat for him to join. He's a very young, up-and-coming prospect of world golf, and all eyes are going to be on him now, obviously heading towards the Players' Championship. he gets to start there, and he's got 2-year exemption on the PGA Tour as well. So things going his way very quickly.
Certainly are. He finished with a flurry after he had a bit of a slip up in that last round. 4 birdies from the last 6 holes. As you say, like he's a young player that those in the golf world in the know have had their eye on for a while. He was 15 years old when he broke Tiger Woods' record as the youngest ever winner of the Junior Orange Bowl. So when you start breaking Tiger Woods' records as a kid, people start watching you, but not a name that a lot of Aussie fans have been watching. So yeah, and I just love that Koala Karl nickname. It's so good.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to stick as well, being the Aussie and all. And obviously, it happens as well around the time that maybe it's the last time we've seen Tiger Woods as well, Chris, with that Achilles injury. He's had a serious leg injury. We know all the serious injuries he's had recently. I don't know if Tiger Woods can come back from this, but it's all about Koala Karl at the moment. But quite interesting, it happens in the same week.
And it might be a nice little bit of animalistic symmetry. We will wait and see, but we can't wait to see what Koala Karl delivers from here. Hopefully, he can continue on, and he's 1 from 4. If he keeps that up over a long PGA career, he'll be a very financially comfortable man. But let's move on to the next of our sports around the grounds, and we'd like to spread ourselves fairly broadly here. We're going to head to the rugby union, and look, I've avoided rugby union for the last couple of years because, well, probably the last decade and a bit, because Australian rugby has been horrible. We've been absolutely diabolical in the Bledisloe, the international series, and the Super Rugby. But all of a sudden, the Super Rugby is starting to heat up. Aussie teams are starting to get wins. The Waratahs, after 4 rounds, are undefeated and sitting second on the ladder, behind only the Chiefs, but they have a game in hand. So this is unheard of. It's back to the days of Ewan McKenzie and Michael Checker sort of eras of coaching Super Rugby, which is probably before half of our fans were even watching sport.
Yeah, it's a nice start for them, and rugby's doing well in New South Wales when the Waratahs are winning. It's always good to see them do well. I don't know if we get too carried away with the wins. They've had 3 on a trot: Highlanders, Fiji, and Drua, and of course the Western Force, who they upset or they beat in the last round. But none of those teams are really expected to make a bit of a finals push. So I won't really bank too much on those wins for the Waratahs. The real test now, Chris, is what's going to really impress me when they go up to Queensland and take on the Reds this week, and then they take on 4 of the New Zealand teams as well. So they've got a very tough run coming up. Let's hope they can consolidate, turn those 3 early wins. If they can jag a few in those next 4 or 5 games that are against very, very serious contenders, then I think we'll be all back on the Waratahs bandwagon for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I think mentioned too, it's a positive piece. We quite often will see one of the Aussie franchises in recent years has gone reasonably well early in the year and done enough to get into finals. But now that we are back to having 4 Aussie franchises, they're sitting 2nd, 5th, 6th, and 7th, all with at least 50% records, which is great to see. It's a good start for Aussie rugby. It is showing that competition's starting to level out, which is nice to see. Obviously, as you say, there's a long way to go in this season. But I'll take the positive for now. We'll wait and see. You touched on the game this weekend, New South Wales versus Queensland. It's a huge one, and it actually has some, as you say, some meaning to it this year, whereas a lot of times in recent years it hasn't. So a few concerns. Jake Gordon is out with a knee injury, so Hugh Sinclair will become the 178th man to captain the Waratahs. That's a very long list when you think about it. History of New South Wales rugby. There's a few other injuries there as well, while on the other side, Queensland will have Hunter Paisami come back in. So that doesn't bode the best for New South Wales, but it's going to be an absolute cracker. And it's good to see the Super Rugby gaining some relevance, I think, is probably the bigger topic in Australia more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And let's hope they can continue. And then obviously it wears off to when the Wallaby sides are selected as well later on in the year.
Yeah, that's going to be exciting. The British and Irish line coming here this year. So it's a good time for Aussie rugby to be building in the right direction. Something that many are questioning might not be building in the right direction is the Newcastle Knights. They have gone absolutely mental and spent $13 million, allegedly, yet to be confirmed in all formal senses in terms of the contract being set, but $13 million over 10 years on Dylan Brown, who's a player who, I think it's fair to say, he's played in a National Rugby League, but probably hasn't shown us his ceiling yet, but he's had injury concerns and everything else. He's also not known as being a game manager and organiser. He's played as 5'8" alongside the likes of Mitch Moses. He hasn't had a great record when his primary half's been out. It's a question mark. The Knights are apparently signing him as a 7, but they're going to have $2.6+ million each year of their salary cap going to 2 players. Have they just overshot here, or is this just the way the market is if they want to get themselves a potential star half?
Look, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Let's be honest, quality halves don't come on the market all too often. Newcastle has struggled to attract the quality, albeit they've got the Kalen Ponga in their side. They haven't been able to attract that quality player. Have they jumped the gun on Dylan Brown? I don't know if they've jumped the gun, but I don't think a 10-year contract is the right option. I'm not a fan of the 10-year contract. I think Daly Cherry Evans' 10-year contract seems to work for the Manly Sea Eagles. Jason Taumalolo's 10-year contract hasn't quite worked out for the Cowboys. So, I mean, I think if you could have attracted him to the club, I don't mind if you're going to give him 1.3, which I still think is quite crazy, considering he's on more money than the best player in the game, who I believe is Nathan Cleary, and many other quality halfbacks in the competition. If you're going to give him that kind of money, that's fine, but I don't think I would have done it over 10 years. The other point you sort of mentioned there, they want to play him at halfback. He doesn't play halfback. He's a running 5'8" at the moment. So I'm not too sure what the Knights are thinking there. We haven't really heard from the Knights either to sort of clarify it at the moment. But it'll be interesting to see what they say when they finally speak about the situation. I heard Nathan Cleary speak about this the other day and saying that he feels it's a good purchase because he's a player that can free up Ponga because he digs so hard in the line. He's a great runner of the ball. I still believe you still need a playmaking half. Perhaps that's Jack Cogger, Chris. I'm not too sure, but perhaps they're banking on, well, we've seen Jack Cogger do it. While Nathan Cleary's out, he's teamed up with a similar player in Jerome Luai and had success, and he's done that before. Maybe they think there could be the opportunity for Cogger to take the reins. As we said, Newcastle hasn't spoken about it yet, so we're not too sure what we're thinking. But 10 years, $1.3 million for a player that hasn't shown his full flight yet, as you mentioned, I don't really agree with it.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, and anyone that's watched the show knows that I'm not a Knights fan as my primary, but they're the team from where I come from, and this to be fair, this is any sport and any franchise. I want to see players succeed, so I'd really love to be eating my words in 3-5
Absolutely.
time. I just don't see it justified. I do understand the market's the market, and as you said, there's not a lot of halves that come on the market. My other concern though is, what message does this send to a young guy like Fletcher Sharp? And it puts them in an interesting position if Fletcher Sharp does actually succeed as a 5'8" this year, because to that point, is their hand then forced? If Fletcher Sharp's absolutely shooting the lights out and being dangerous at 5'8", where do they play? All of a sudden, they've got three ball running. I know Ponga does kick a little bit, but essentially non-primary kickers in their spine. You're then going to force yourself to be in a position to go and potentially find a kicking 9, and again, I don't know where that looks. I mean, they've got Crossland there who can kick at 9, but it's an interesting piece, and the whole maths of 20% of their salary cap at $2 and a bit million, more than 20% of their salary cap being invested in two players. That's going to mean they're going to need a lot of good quality depth players filling those jersey numbers from 14 to 30 in that squad as well.
Yeah, totally agree with your point about Fletcher Sharp. I thought he was outstanding in round 1 for the Knights. And if he goes out and brains it against the Dolphins again in round 2 and continues to do so throughout the season, it's really going to give the Newcastle Knights a headache, a big $1.3 million a year headache.
It's going to be a big headache if it doesn't work out. But if it works out, look, lots of people told him they were crazy when they spent the big money they did on Kalen Ponga in the early days. And, he played a couple of games at that point. Like, he didn't even have the body of work that Brown does. So they'll be geniuses if it works out.
I guess we've got to add in as well, Chris, you can't blame the bloke for taking the money either. I mean, good on him. You always encourage them to make as much money while they can. And he's obviously done something to show the Knights that he's worth that much, and they've offered it to him and he's taking it. So good on Dylan Brown in that regard.
100%. You see some stories that have come out today that, he grew up in a house in New Zealand that, barely had fibre on the walls and stuff. So he's come a long way. You got to make hay while the sun shines. It's also, though, really quickly created some other moving pieces and ructions, because Parramatta all of a sudden now very deep pockets. And we've got a situation now where there's talk that Jerome Luai in 2027 could end up at Parramatta, even though he's only played one game for his new club. The NRL's contracts and everything else that goes with it, they just get more and more ridiculous by the day, don't they?
Contracts, I don't believe should exist anymore because they just don't stand up, unfortunately. Although, everyone now is going to be linked to Parramatta. It's quite funny. Jerome Hughes, as you said, has only played one game. Jerome Luai, sorry, has only played one game for the Tigers, and he's already been linked at moving out of his contract, and all these other players to Parramatta. I think that's what the media is for. We're out there to talk it up and mention all these players. But I sort of feel sorry for clubs and players when all this sort of stuff starts as well.
Yeah, exactly right. It's a bit of a circus. It's got to be distracting for all involved. So, look, the good thing is footy's underway, so we've at least got that happening, and we do have round one in the rear vision mirror. And you talked about the Knights. I thought, as you said, Fletcher Sharp was really impressive. But in terms of round one, who were the standout teams for you, Robbo?
Melbourne Storm, by far, they were outstanding. I couldn't believe the first half they put together against Parramatta Eels. I know Mitchell Moses was out and the Eels were missing a few players. Obviously, the first season without Clint Gutherson, so there's a few young players in there finding their feet. But the Melbourne Storm looked like it looked like round 10 for them, or they were preparing to head in towards the finals. They were just firing on all fours. It was so good to see as well Ryan Pappenhausen and the way he played in that game. We all know how many terrible injuries he's had. So, for him to start round one finally of the season, and then hopefully he's brained it and can continue to go through injury free would be awesome. But Melbourne Storm for me, number one. I thought Manly were fantastic as well against the Cowboys at Four Pines Park. They played awesome, and another player there, similar to Ryan Pappenhausen, is Tom Trebojevic. He's a player that you want to see stay fit because he's a rugby league fan's dream. He's the one that puts bums on seats, and when he's there and playing well, Manly play well. So I think they're the two real big standouts for me.
Yeah, I was impressed by the Broncos as well. I mean, obviously that scoreline. We know the Roosters are a bit depleted and all those sorts of things, but I think Michael Maguire's influence starting to show already there, and hopefully it's not just a blip on the radar. But with the talent they've got in that side, I mean, when you've got a spine that's got Reece Walsh, Ben Hunt, and Adam Reynolds already there, and then you've got Ezra Mam to come and fit back in there later on. He's going to have some really good headaches later in the year if he can keep them all fit and healthy. Especially then, you throw in Payne Haas, Patrick Carrigan, Jordan Ricky, they're stacked, Selwyn Cobbo. Like, it's phenomenal to think the talent they've got at their disposal. And again, as much as it grates me, to that comment you made before about, certain teams being strong in certain sports, making those sports, a strong Broncos means that the NRL is actually in a good spot.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm not one to cheer on the Broncos every weekend, but when they're playing well, it is good for the NRL. And the number of names that you just mentioned then, they all stood up in the opening round against the Roosters. And if they keep doing that week in, week out, they're definitely going to be there come the pointy end of the season for sure.
They certainly will. We've got a big round two slate ahead of us, but without going too in depth, the show will go live on Thursday. You and I will both be at the Knights and the Dolphins, the Saifidi Cup. I just can't wait to see those two boys against each other. Just like I think they've played through since they're juniors. They've never played against each other. They've always been in this. They're at the entrance together, and they came through the Knights system together. The only difference was one of them might have taken a step up, or one was in Origin at a point when the other one wasn't. So, it'd be interesting to see. I know their dad gets all the games here in Newcastle. I don't know if he's going to have a half Knights, half Dolphins jersey, but I tell you what, they won't leave anything behind. I reckon they'll be getting right into each other to get bragging rights over their twin brother.
Yeah, it'd be definitely good to see them go up against each other. I never thought of it like that, but it'd be definitely see them go against each other. I'm sure Daniel Saifidi will have a point to prove. I mean, he's the one that was let go by the Knights, and I'm sure he'd be looking for a huge game to turn around and go, maybe you let the wrong brother go.
Well, there's a couple of ex-Knights in that Dolphins squad. I know a couple of them have points to prove. Young Kurt Donohue's another one that has been really strong for them in recent times. He played for Fiji in the off-season as well, coming off the bench, and he just re-signed on a long deal. So we'll watch this space. It's going to be an absolute cracker. It's a big round. There's some teams with points to prove. We're talking off air about Jeremiah Nanai getting dropped. The Cowboys have got a point to prove. Parramatta have got a point to prove. The Roosters, and then there's a couple of other teams. The Raiders, for example, they're going to be looking to show that it wasn't a fluke in Vegas, and they come up against the Broncos, which is going to be a huge test. So I'm just pumped that footy's back. So it's great to have it on our TVs, in our stadiums, and ripping and roaring.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to get to two games this round. So Knights and the Dolphins, as you mentioned, and head back to Wollongong and watch the Dragons and the Bunnies, which should be a good one. Of course, the Dragons, after that round one loss up there at Cogra, will be looking for redemption against the Bunnies, who snuck home against the Dolphins.
Yeah, that one's going to be an interesting one on Saturday afternoon as well, mate. So, as I said, all the games have got some nice little storylines, and interesting to see Jerome Luai taking on Parramatta and Liam Galvin, who's the other one that they've talked about for Parramatta. So they get a chance to put themselves right in the shop window at Parramatta Stadium on. But it'll be a huge round, mate. We might take a quick breather, towel off, and then get back into it and talk some NBL. Hey.
Sounds good, mate.
After a quick chance to refresh, reinvigorate, and rehydrate from around the grounds, we're back with Tim Robbo Robinson, and he's right into his sweet spot now. He's our NBL and basketball guru. And Robbo, you've got the Hawk singlet on. We know you're passionate about the NBL, so we're ready to get our hands dirty here.
I haven't taken this singlet off for quite some time, Chris. It's starting to smell a little bit, but I tell you what, we're only 2 games into a 5-game series against Melbourne United. Wasn't it nice to see the other night the way that game ended? I'm sure we're going to talk about that soon, but it's not coming off for a while yet. It might not come off for a while if we win the championship either.
I'm concerned about next time I see you the fragrance, but we'll worry about that at the time. I might just need to keep my distance. Big news though, during the week, the NBA and NBL getting together. We've obviously seen the NBL teams go over to the NBA in recent years in the preseason, but a team has committed to coming to Australia in October, and that is the New Orleans Pelicans. They're going to play a game against Melbourne United and a game against Southeast Melbourne on the 3rd and 5th of October, respectively, and they've said they're going to bring out all of their stars. This is big in basketball terms, but it's big in sports terms for Australia too.
Yeah, I mean, we've been waiting a long time for this to happen, haven't we? And it's fantastic to know that the Pelicans are going to head out here in October, and they're going to play 2 games, both in Melbourne against Melbourne United and the Phoenix as well. You've mentioned that the NBL teams have been over there and played against the NBA teams, but to have them come out here, let's hope this starts to set a bit of a trend and it can continue on. Couple of questions I did have off the announcement, obviously, is why the Pelicans? I mean, there's so many other NBA teams that have Aussies playing, which you thought would have been another draw card, I guess, for Aussie basketball fans to go and see this game. Although I don't think they'll have problems selling tickets, but I thought it would have been nice to see a team come out here with an bit of an Aussie flavour. My other question, Zion Williamson, Chris, do you think he's going to be out here? I mean, he hasn't been performing too well. There's been lots of question marks around his game as well.
I think if he's still at New Orleans, he will be here. Whether he plays might be a different story. I think they are very much to their word that they're going to bring out Williamson, McCollum, the whole kit and caboodle, but whether they all play, because they've thought they're going to build it into being a bit of a preseason camp as well. And, at the end of the day, who wouldn't like to be, you're coming from New Orleans in the south, come out to beautiful Melbourne, a couple of weeks at the back end of September and October as spring's just in full swing. Perfect weather to be down here, enjoy the sunshine, get around Melbourne, do all of that, roll out a couple of games. Do Williamson and co play? I don't know, but I think they'll be here.
I tell you what, I think Melbourne can have the Pelicans because maybe the Hawks, maybe Justin Tatum could reach out to Jason Tatum and invite the Boston Celtics down there. I'm sure we could sell out all 5,000 seats at the Winter Entertainment Centre for that one.
Look, I'm sure they could make enough money if they had one game at Illawarra and one game in Sydney. The Sydney game would probably make up for it if they sell both out. We're about that. Look, I'm very much a beggars and choosers sort of person. I think if we can show with our feet that this is going to be there, then we'll get bigger franchises. But again, on paper, some of the names in this Pelican squad, it should be a really good squad, and it's going to be a huge test for Melbourne United and Southeast Melbourne.
Yeah, it's something Australian basketball needs. We've been over there, we've seen those games, but for them to come over here ahead of their season, bring their full squad out, I think if it all goes down well, if there's bums on seats, and it gets received really well, I think that's going to be the first of many NBA teams to come out to the Aussie shores for sure.
Yeah, I think and we talked about the NFL the other week, but the NFL and the NBA starting to do these things off the back of the NHL having success last season, and they're going to return again, is starting to show that, it's not insignificant for these American teams to go to, Mexico or to go to Europe or the UK is a lot easier than getting to Australia. It's a big disruption. It's a big move for them. So for them to be taking that leap certainly shows the lens in which the Australian fan base, but also the league is viewed now in terms of the NBL, and it's just continuing to move up, and that's credit to Larry Kesselman and his team for what they've done.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the younger players as well, imagine being a young Aussie, being able to line up against them and the chance to perform against these elite guys from the NBA as well. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people with eyes on the game. So it's a great chance for the young Aussie hoopers as well out there on the court against them.
100%, and to do so in front of their home fans and family is going to be amazing. So we can't wait for that. I know I'll be trying to make sure my travel aligns with happening to occur in Melbourne in October if I can. So we'll see how we go on that. Something a little bit more regional than the international flavour of the New Orleans is the Bendigo Spirit. They continue to dominate the WNBL. They've claimed their third title. They won it in 2 games. It's a best of 3 series at the moment in the WNBL. Not wanting to find a negative at the moment, but I'd love to see this become a best of 5 in the future. But a big congratulations to Bendigo taking that out.
Yeah, they did extremely well. They've had a great season, only the 3 losses all season long for the Bendigo Spirit. They're clearly the best team in the competition. And with the names that they produced, I mean, just reading before, Griffin, Kelly Wilson and Tolo, all their 5th WNBL championship, which is extremely impressive. And then you throw in Semi Whitcomb, who won everything this year in the WNBL, being the MVP of the league. She's now won the championship, and then she won the Rachel Spawn Grand Final MVP as well. They were untouchable this year. Bendigo, I find it so hard to believe that that's their first title in more than a decade. It's quite incredible.
It is. It feels that they've been a fairly dominant force in recent years, but they've just fallen at those last hurdles each time. So, yeah, as you say, they won back-to-back titles, I think 13, 14, so 11 years ago now. So, again, 3 titles in, I think they've only been in the competition for about 17 seasons from memory, 17, 18 seasons. So, it's not a bad strike rate, especially when you consider, how many times they've been sort of up there at different points. I think they were right on the cusp of the finals the last couple of years and just fell short of making those. So a couple of tough years before that, but we look forward to seeing what they build from here. Yeah, again, they've got a really good roster that's got some future and some upside, and a lot of these players will go on to some bigger and better things. And again, the WNBL with its new ownership will undoubtedly, with the involvement of the NBL crew, be going on to bigger and better things itself.
Yeah, it's getting bigger and bigger, and it's been nice to be able to watch a few of the games as well on ESPN throughout the season. I like the double headers that a lot of the teams, I know the Sydney Kings are doing it. And I can tell you now the Illawarra Hawks are currently in talks to try and get their own WNBL franchise as well in the coming years. So those talks are underway, and it's only going to make that league bigger and better.
It certainly will. I know from being around the NBL 1 East last year that there's a number of teams that have, that's their approach. They think that the WNBL is actually a faster growing market and obviously probably a lower entry point for them. And teams that might have a future aspiration. I don't doubt that Newcastle, with a look to getting a new venue, will be a team that might look to get into the WNBL, similar to what we've seen Bendigo and Townsville and some of these places that have just carved a niche just having a WNBL, and it might be a future piece that they then get NBL after that. So we'll wait and see. We've seen Geelong come in this year as well. So certainly an exciting time for the WNBL, and congrats again to the Bendigo Spirit. Moving over to the men's, and mate, how was the Robinson household after game 1?
After game 1, quite sad. I was at the game and couldn't believe the way we threw it away. We did so well in so many areas to shut out certain players. Unfortunately, a player that we least expected in Marcus Lee came up big for Melbourne United and got the job done with a big, strong double-double. But, we felt, as a spectator, I felt that the Hawks were really in control of that game. They led all the turns, and that final quarter, they just got wrapped up. Defensively, I thought the Hawks weren't as strong as they had been most of the season, and Melbourne United made them pay because they are such a good side. So it was really, really disappointing to see them lose that game, especially in front of such a big crowd. And then have to go down to Melbourne and play game 2, being a game down.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. Melbourne looked really effective, especially in the second half, the way they shut down Harvey and Trey Kell. Obviously, the 2 biggest producers for the Hawks traditionally, but between them, I think, 14 or 15 points. So it was a very quiet night for the 2 superstars.
Yeah, Trey Kell, I think he only ended up having the 6 points in that first game. It didn't come through lack of trying. The amount of times he did get to the ring or get a clear shot, and he just couldn't sink it. It was like there was some glad wrap on the ring or something. But more so credit to the Melbourne defenders and the way they hustle. Shea Ely's a fantastic defender, obviously being the best defender in the league, and Matthew Dellavedova is just a fox terrier. So they did a good job, and the 2 big players for the Hawks, and they just couldn't get it done on their own court.
No, they certainly couldn't. But as you said, it then came to a Wednesday night clash down in Melbourne. Nervous times, because the last thing you want to do is fall 2-0 down in a 5-game series. You're on the road to Melbourne. A crowd expected somewhere between 9 and 10,000, and that's what they got. And it went down to the wire in the end. I don't know if you got any fingernails left after the Wednesday night clash, but look, the Hawks did enough to level it back up, and it's back to, on serve, if you will, to use the tennis term. It's back to the home court advantage being held. But it's going to be interesting as we head into we're going to go to at least 4 games, if not 5 from here. So it's going to be interesting, but there's some really standout performances. Harvey bounced back, Trey Kell got some points, and Big Sammy Froling, as always, he's just absolutely a key piece of that puzzle that they've put together this year.
Look, I don't know about fingernails, but I definitely had no hair left after pulling it out. I thought the Hawks, again, they were well in control of that game. There were moments there that they slipped and Melbourne jumped back in front, but the Hawks continued to find a way, and they got out to an 11-point lead heading into that last quarter. And I thought, here we go, they'll go on with it. But Melbourne United fought back. Ian Clark led the charge. He had 31 points. What a tremendous back end of the season he's had for Melbourne United. He's been sensational. Chris Goulding continued to hit some big shots as well, especially down the stretch. But for the Hawks, they hung in there. They got a chance to get a final shot away, and it was that man that you mentioned before, Tyler Harvey, who probably didn't have his best game in game 1, but really stood up in game 2. He finished with 24 points, including the bomb 3 that he hit to put the Hawks up by 2 with only 6 seconds on the clock. That was huge. And combining with the likes of Froling, they finally got the ball inside, and Froling went to work. He had Marcus Lee in foul trouble, which restricted him a little bit. He had Jack White in trouble, who ended up being on the bench for most of the game and really took him out of the game. That's because Froling went to town inside the key, and Trey Kell finally did as well. He was driving the ball. He looked really dangerous. He ended up with 18, 8, 6, and 4. Talk about stuffing a stat sheet, and what a time to do it. So the big 3 had to step up for the Hawks. They did it in game 2. They escaped with a 2-point win, and as you mentioned, back on level terms. So I can't wait for Sunday, game 3, back in Illawarra, and I'm sure they'll be riding that win into this one, the Hawks, and they won't want to let it slip again in front of a home crowd.
You certainly need to harness that momentum. One of the phenomenal things, just looking back through the box score, Melbourne United shot at 57% overall, 67% from 2-point, 46%, basically 1 in 2 from the 3-point range. The Hawks clearly creating a lot more attacking opportunities. If they can start to finish at that little bit higher clip, I don't think they'd be happy with 46% overall. It'd be a touch below where they'd want to be. They have the potential to blow one of these games out, I think, and hopefully for your sake and for the Hawks faithful at win, that will be game 3, which might put a bit of an exclamation point to send them back to Melbourne.
Yeah, Chris, you're right. And at times it did look, as we got out to that 11-point margin, it looked like the Hawks were going to kick away. They were going to kick away. But once they got there, Melbourne came back, hit some big shots, and the Hawks started missing. They went back outside. They were missing 3-pointers or missing just simple shots that they should have got around the ring. Free throws continues to be a nightmare for the Hawks as well. So there's a lot of points they're still leaving out in the court. So fingers crossed they can put it together from a Hawks perspective. A Hawks fans' perspective, that they can put it together in one of these games in the championship for sure.
Well, it's certainly the case. We might know by next Thursday who our champion is. We'll wait and see. It's an enthralling battle. There's a part of me that hopes it goes to 5, but I'm sure there's a part of your nerves that hopes it's wrapped up in 4 your way.
Well, yeah, I'd love to get a big win down here on Sunday, and I'm going to make sure I get some tickets and head down to Melbourne for Game 4, and I'll be love to win it down there as well. But hey, if it's got to come down to Game 5 and we can win a championship in our home court, I won't complain about that. But however they get it done, I just want Illawarra to get it done. Fingers crossed.
Well, as I said, we'll know much more either next Wednesday night, the 19th, or Sunday afternoon, the 23rd. Might need your boss to just know that you might not be in on the 24th if it gets to the 23rd and goes the distance for Illawarra.
And the 25th and the 26th and the 27th, quite possibly.
Well, then you may as well take a couple of weeks. Robbo, a big thank you as always. Looking forward to hopefully catching up with you at the Knights and Dolphins game tomorrow, as we touched on in around the grounds. But good luck to the Hawks. As much as it doesn't pain me to say, it's obviously been tough to see Illawarra dominating Sydney this year. But yeah, I'm certainly rooting for the Hawks. There's still the New South Wales blue blood running through, so we don't like seeing those Victorians win too many things.
Yeah, give one for the little brother, Chris. Thanks, mate.
Well, it's now time to move on from the basketball to the cricket, and returning for another cap on the Chris McPherson Show, Paul Dennett from Dennett on Cricket. Paul, good to have you back on the show.
Great to be here, Chris. Thank you.
First of all, mate, the podcast well and truly underway. You're starting to cover off on what's happening in the cricket world. A few episodes in now.
Yeah, a few episodes in, and cricket's ended. So, as I think I said last time, it's a stupid time to start a podcast, but on cricket. There's always talking points, and I've got some historical ones in the works. So, doing some research, looking through some old papers, and hopefully some entertaining ones as the long build up to the Ashes begins. So, some historical Ashes stuff, which is kind of what I enjoy doing.
Speaking of the Ashes, something that is literally in the 2 seconds that you were just talking, then dropped across my screen. The announcement today that Australia and England are going to play in a historic day-night test at the MCG, March 2027. It works very well for me because it will be across the days of my 40th birthday, so that might be a nice way to celebrate. But this is huge as a 100th anniversary.
Yeah, they'd already announced that it was going to happen, but the fact that it's going to be day-night, I think is fantastic. And I think it would have had a good crowd anyway, but March in Melbourne, I suppose they're going to they've already fought with the AFL to get the venue. So the fact that it's going to be day-night, the 50 years, what will then be 50 years from the centenary test match, got fantastic crowds. And you know how Melbourne love a big crowd. So, hopefully they can challenge the record that was set just last summer, the Boxing Day test match, the highest official crowd, audited crowd in the history of test cricket. And one of the other little things that I like is it actually won't be part of the Ashes. It'll be the first Australia-England test match not to be part of the Ashes for 4 decades, and it'll be the 17th. And I won't bore your listeners with going through the 16 previously, but it is a very interesting, strange history of the non-Ashes Australia-England test matches.
Yes, it's not the norm, and I think there's lots of people, as you say, with it being a number of decades, that wouldn't even recall the last time it happened. So it'll be a very unique piece of sporting history to be part of if you can attend that. And it sounds like a long time away, but it's almost 2 years. I think it is 2 years to the day today that it'll get underway. So we look forward to that, and that'll be really exciting as we get to that. But we've got lots more to get through before that, both today and across the next 12 months in the cricketing calendar. There's so much happening. But before we look too far forwards further, let's have a look back. And we just got through the Champions Trophy in our dialogue the last couple of weeks with a few of the guests. It's been called a lot of things, not a lot of them favourable in terms of this tournament and how it went ahead. But India did what they had absolutely no excuse not to do, and that was won the tournament. It would have been diabolical for Indian cricket if they hadn't won it, I think, with all the advantages they had.
It's very differently covered in India and outside India. Outside India, you just encapsulated exactly how it's being described. In India, you would think that they've won the FIFA World Cup the way that they're carrying on. And good luck to them. But it's sort of a little bit frustrating. I always knew this was on the cards, but Australia's proud 6 men's World Cups when no other nation is close. India on 2, West Indies on 2. India have come up with this kind of new term of ICC trophies, which India is much closer to Australia on. So I think Australia has the 6 World Cups plus the 2 Champions Trophy, 1 T20 World Cup, and the World Test Championships. I think Australia's 10. This, I think, does that make India 6 now, maybe 7? They're on that score, they're actually catching Australia. So they're very excited about that. Hopefully Australia can win against South Africa in a few months' time and get another one on that score there. But yeah, it's a tournament that was unnoticed in Australia. And if it was noticed, it was to be condemned for all of the farcical issues about it. But I think that what needs to be said is that India, even if all those advantages that they had didn't occur, would have been strong favourites to win it anyway. They clearly were the best side.
Yeah, certainly we talked about that. And, it is quite an achievement when you look at the fact they were without essentially and arguably their best player across all formats in Bumrah, and we talked about that in the lead-up. So some credit due. I don't know whether all credit is due. They had some favourable things, but again, those travel pieces and all those other eventualities didn't give them wins. They still had to go out and win, what was essentially, on program 5 games. So well done to them. That's about as much as I can say in terms of congratulatory notes for cricket in terms of India at the moment. One thing that was interesting that came out, and we obviously know what happened here at the end of the Border Gavaskar series with Rohit Sharma, but he came out and was very specific after winning the tournament when questioned about would this be the end of his one-day career, that he's not going anywhere, which is, I'm sure a great piece of news for Indian fans. It probably polarised some other fans. Some fans will think he should be done by now. Others will be happy to see him continuing on. Others will be dreading seeing him come and take on their teams.
Well, it's interesting, the contrast with him and Smith. Some people have attributed Steve Smith's retirement to the fact that it then frees him up from bilateral one-days and such, that he can earn money playing in Major League Cricket and various other tournaments. That's not open to Indians because, of course, they play in the IPL and that's all that they're able to play in. So it is a different sort of calculus that needs to be considered by the players in terms of what they're doing. So, why would he retire when he's on top of the world at the moment? And it's only 2 years away till the next 50-over World Cup. So I'm sure he plans to lead India through that as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one you talk of that many, I guess, non-Indians forget when they look at someone like Rohit Sharma, is that he doesn't have that opportunity to, continue on and fill his pockets, if you will, fill his boots with cash from these franchise leagues, because they are only entitled to play in the IPL, which is, I still find quite interesting considering the multi-franchise ownership models of some of these IPL teams. And I wonder if there might be a point in time that someone, and again, look at someone like Sharma, he's 37, he turns 38 next month, I think, at the end of April. He'll be near on 40 by the next 50-over World Cup. I'm sure he can continue on, but there's a point at, I think that the BCCI and Indian cricket need to understand and accept the service that he's given and maybe allow him to do that. Not that I think Rohit Sharma's ever going to be short of $1 in India.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I think I remember seeing an interview that Mike Atherton and Nasser Hussain did with Dinesh Karthik, and they began it by saying, we've had a statistician calculate how much money you've made in the IPL, and you've just clicked over to $1 billion rupees, which I think embarrassed him a little bit. But yeah, that's probably, I've forgotten the ratio, it's like 20 million Australian dollars, but he's not short of a quid, and it is different. And I suppose that's something that the BCCI have enforced because it just ensures that the gap between the IPL and all other tournaments is maintained. It would be maintained anyway, but they do what they like, and no one can really stop them.
Well, that is exactly right. As Brody likes to put it when he's on the show, you can't spell BCCI without ICC. It forms part of it. It's one of those things. Interestingly enough, just having a look, Rohit Sharma's net worth currently approximated at $22 million US. So I think he'll be okay.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of retirements, you touched on it there. Steve Smith announcing his one-day retirement. Look, it's again an interesting one because one-day cricket has somewhat fallen out of favour with the broader cricketing community. I know the cricketing tragics like yourself and I'll watch 10-over cricket, or if they told me there was a 12-day test, I'd watch that, or a timeless test, I'd go and watch that too, right? But for a lot of people, 50-over cricket has kind of fallen by the wayside because it's either the short fix of T20 or the enduring test of test match cricket. So not surprising that we've seen Steve Smith do this, but I think there's a lot of people that will probably just blaze past this and brush past it, so long as he's still playing in the test side and doing his thing for us and turning up in T20, we'll be happy.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, you're right, and I myself find 50-over cricket the least exciting of the formats, even though I grew up on it and used to love it, and I still want to like it, but it's number 3 for me by quite a long way. It's also that now that this Champions Trophy is over, the next 50-over games that will have any kind of meaning aren't for that World Cup in 2 years' time. And I know I said it's short way away, but does Steve Smith really want us to be pinned down playing the odd bilateral series here and there? I think it makes sense. The one thing I would say is that I would hope that Cricket Australia are very pragmatic about it and say to him at some point, listen, when the World Cup in South Africa comes around, if you're playing as well as you are now, we're going to ask you to come back in and play. And I would say that anyone who is upset about that and says, what about the players that have done the right thing and played in all these matches, and surely we've got to be building for the future. But my own answer as an Australian fan is I want us to win a 7th World Cup. And, I'll pick anyone if they're available to do that. I would have picked David Warner for this Champions Trophy. And so I hope that they are willing to do that. And yeah, his one-day career is overshadowed by his Test career. I was looking back through some of the figures. I've forgotten, even though I was there, which is bad for my memory. But his a century at the in 2015 semi-final against India at the SCG. He then guided Australia to the win in the final of the World Cup at the MCG in 2015. So that's probably the highlight of his, the most significant innings that he played. But even in losing sides, the 2019 World Cup where we lost to the semis, he got runs. This game the other day against India, he got runs. So he is going to retire as one of the best one-day players that we've ever had. And his figures stack up pretty well. There's a glut of them at the top with averages in the sort of 40s. And then strike rates are hard to judge because each era the strike rates change. But you sort of say maybe Bevan and Hussey are the very best. And then there's a group of 5 or 6 and he sits well within that.
Yeah, I certainly think he lays claim to being either in or right on the cusp of that top 5 that we've seen in one-day cricket, especially from a batting point of view. As you said, the figures sort of speak for themselves. 170 games, an average at 43, 1200s, and countless other pieces to mention there. A phenomenal career, and it's just this element of it that's over. It is interesting when you touch on that 50 over piece, though. I was just thinking as you talk through there, when we're sort of ranking it, I would actually tune into the domestic 50 over competition more than I would a bilateral 50 over competition, which is a weird thing for me to have just processed while we're having this conversation. I think it's that meaning piece that you talked about before, and again, to Steve Smith's, I guess career and what he's done for Australia. I agree. Let him go and make some money now. Let him go and take those opportunities. We're literally talking about potentially millions of dollars over those 2 years, and then if he's still in the best, 5 or 6 batters that we've got on form across all formats. Well, then it's madness not to have him back in for the World Cup. And it's actually given those other players in those 2 years an opportunity to prove that they are on that level. They've had that window then. And if they haven't managed to capitalise, well, that's where we are. So it'll be an interesting piece. But speaking of chances to capitalise, chances to impress, the domestic season is coming to an end. And it is an absolute red-hot race home. The last round of the Sheffield Shield is upon us from the end of this week. And there's some very interesting games. The one thing we know, South Australia already through to the final. They will host it, possibly at the Adelaide Oval. The AFL have said they're open to it. If it may mean that date that we see there needs to be adjusted slightly because of a couple of Adelaide and Port Adelaide home games, but a drop in pitch can achieve the desired outcome. So that's a really positive thing before we get into having a look at this sort of where the teams stack up here, Paul. Yeah,
definitely. And as a cricket fan, I'm realistic enough to know that the Adelaide Oval, once you get to March, the AFL is by far the only tenant. But it would be disappointing if they had it at, Karen Rolton Oval or somewhere. If they can, with the technology, if they can get a good drop in, that's the key. You would hate for it to be an insipid, slow, flat wicket, which sometimes drop-ins can be. But the Adelaide pitch in recent years has been pretty good. If they can make sure that it's going to be a good strip, then that would be great. And I would imagine that there'll be a bit of a crowd there, nothing major, but it might be enough to get a bit of an atmosphere, 5,000, 10,000, something like that, maybe even more, because it's been a long time since, I haven't checked this, 95, 96, maybe the last time South Australia won the Shield. So it's a long time ago.
Yeah, I believe that's right. So 1996, so every other team's won it since 2013, so in just over a decade. South Australia did host it, I think, in 2015-16, so 9 seasons ago, where Victoria won it. But they played it at Glenelg. And again, no disrespect to Glenelg or any of these other grounds. Obviously, Karen Rolton's a very different ground to what it was then. Even if you've got a couple of thousand there versus, well, let's say 2,500 there versus Adelaide Oval, it's going to reverberate different. It is actually going to create some atmosphere in Adelaide Oval, and the theatre and the spectacle of that ground will make a huge difference. So hopefully it can work out that way. But the interesting thing as we look at these 3 games in South Australia taking on Queensland, which is currently first versus second on the ladder, but there's only just over 4 points separating second and fifth, which is Queensland, New South Wales, WA and Victoria. Tasmania are out of contention. So those other 4 teams, though, depending on the results in these games, all of them have an opportunity that if results go their way and the wonderful bonus point system, which we're not going to try and get into because it would take us about 4 hours to try and understand ourselves before we explain it to anyone else, it means that coming into this final round, these final 4 days, there's 4 teams in contention for one spot, which is absolutely thrilling because the last few years of Sheffield Shield have been somewhat cakewalks to an extent for certain teams, and for other teams it's been, by game 4 or 5, their season's over.
Yeah, it is exciting. And yeah, you're right about the bonus points. Every time I've ever commentated on a Shield game, I relearn the system and I understand it. I think, okay, I'll never forget this. And then as soon as the game's over, I forget it. And I don't like it. I mean, I think any table that has 2 decimal places in it is getting a bit ridiculous. But that's a minor quibble. It is pretty cool. And hopefully it does garner some national attention. It's pretty hard in March, which is probably even more so than September, the biggest time for the football codes. But it is going to be pretty interesting. And I found this round interesting as well, just that, you got Sam Constas getting some runs, Scott Boland getting wickets, Fergus O'Neill, who is my big boom player, up and coming, wickets and runs. Guzman Khawaja getting 100. It's nice at this time of the year when you can look and see who's potentially lining themselves up for a future spot in the Australian side.
It certainly is. And speaking of Australian players, South Australia will have Alex Carey available and may have Spencer Johnson available as well, which is, when you think that they've gone through this season, they've just lost one game and they're 15 points clear. I think the next best teams, Queensland, New South Wales and WA, have had 3 wins, 3 losses and 3 draws from their 9 games. So they're clearly the best side in this competition. It is phenomenal to think that they can then bring you back in these talents who haven't, been playing all throughout the season, but have played at points this year.
Yeah, and actually having criticised the bonus system, one of the bonus point system, one of the good things is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but the final, if it is a draw, they do go on the bonus points. And so it used to be that if you hosted the final, you would just prepare the flattest surface of all time. Remember one time, I think Queensland getting about, they declare it 900 or 700, and and you don't blame them for doing so. But now that incentive to just produce a barren road and squash the life out of the game is gone. So but every chance it'll actually be a good game.
Well, that's what we want, because that has been the concern with 4-day cricket and coming to a Sheffield Shield final, that you end up in that situation, as you say, where they just roll out, a bit of the Sturt Highway, I think it is, in South Australia. But the good news is we won't be in that situation, which is wonderful to see. But the great thing is, as we said, and to Tasmania's credit, they were only out of it after last round. So we came into the penultimate game where all 6 teams were still in it. And even at that point, I think there was 3 or 4 teams that were a chance of hosting the final coming into last round. And it was just that another win for South Australia secured that. So, as we saw on screen there, South Australia take on Queensland, New South Wales up against Tasmania. And then the final game will be WA versus Victoria. The winner of that will set themselves in very good stead, because obviously they'll gain a big leg up on their rivals. It'll be interesting to see how both South Australia and Tasmania approach this, but I'm sure both of them will be. South Australia want to continue that winning run that goes back. I don't think they've lost since round 4. While for Tasmania, they'd love to finish the season with a win and prove spoilers for New South Wales, who has been a production line of some of their talent.
Yeah, and this argument that the ACT should have a side so that some of the New South Wales talent can go elsewhere than to Tasmania. But I think that we used to always say that that the Sheffield Shield outside of Test cricket was the world's premier red ball competition. In recent years, that's probably dipped a little bit. There's lots of county cricket fans in England who would disagree, but it's nice to feel that just the last year or so, it's risen to begin in prominence somewhat.
Yeah, I agree. I think, look, if you're in Adelaide, Hobart or Perth and you've got the opportunity to watch these games, they're going to be enthralling from the 15th to the 18th of March, and then we'll head to late March for the final. But look, I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, we both have a very blue eye on this. But look, I think all teams, based on the seasons they put together, it would be a great result, a great final, no matter who plays in it. But I'll certainly be keeping a slightly sharper eye on the day-night match down at Bellerive. If the ball doesn't swing enough in Bellerive, they're playing with a pink ball.
Yeah, it could be nice and chilly as March kicks in. I also support New South Wales, but contrary to the accusations I get whenever I set a TikTok out that somehow tangentially bigs up a New South Wales player, as much as I love cricket, I'm much more likely to support the New South Wales State of Origin team in rugby league than I am in the Sheffield Shield. I like New South Wales to win, but the main thing is I want it to be a production line of Australian players.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the difference. Is the one domestic comp where its primary focus is seen to be that the supply chain to the Test team. So, it's great to see it's going well. We're looking forward to it, and I'm sure in a couple of weeks' time we'll have a bit of a debrief and a breakdown as we look at the final and start talking about some of those names that have put themselves up in lights for the future.
Just on that, it's interesting. Doing some research for Ash's series for my podcast, I was looking at Mark Taylor and talking in 1999 when he was saying how he remembered in 1993 when England finally won a Test match against Australia for the first time in a long time, that all the players 5 minutes after stumps from England had disappeared because they all had county games to attend the next day. And your point around that the Shield is a production line of its main job is to provide Australian talent. For so long, county cricket didn't do that, and to an extent still doesn't. That there is that sort of, sometimes when you say in the Sheffield Shield, such and such a player, we wanted about number 4 because that's where he's going to play for Australia. The states kind of fall into line, whereas in England the counties are much more powerful, and that doesn't happen. And as much as I like the integrity of the Shield competition, I think we've got a better system here than they have there.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Well, a big thank you, Paul, as always, for coming and giving us your cricket analysis and knowledge. There's lots of cricket to come, as you said. It's mostly on the other side of the globe as we head towards IPL and all these other wonderful things. But we've got this last little glimpse with the Sheffield Shield, so we'll make the most of it. A little bit of Oz A and England A to come in the women's too, which we might talk about in the next couple of weeks. So looking forward to it. But again, as always, if people want to go a little bit more in depth than we have today and get into some of those train spotting pieces you were talking about with Ashes tests and different other things, they can find you obviously on TikTok. You've got your Substack and now Dennett on cricket as well, the podcast.
Yep. Thank you very much, Chris. Great to be on again.
Well, it's now time to move on to the motorsport. The F1 season is upon us, and when the F1 season is upon us, there's only one man we will call on. He is our producer. He is our motorsport guru. He is J.R. Carter. JR, you're back. You haven't been bullied in the intro today. We're ready to rock and roll.
Haven't been bullied, but I was threatened with another drive-by due to some Parramatta mistakes I made on the weekend, but we'll leave that there. We're not going to go into what that was all about.
No, we can give that a fairly wide berth. I think we've got enough motorsport to talk about to not worry about talking about the Parramatta Eels. The less said about them, the better at the moment. Let's dig into it, and let's start off the top. And the biggest thing at the moment that's just dropped in the lead up to the Aussie F1 Grand Prix is Oscar Piastri signing a multi-year extension. It was very vaguely worded initially, but we got there in the end and worked out what's going on. Yeah,
so we managed to get into the weeds of it, and it's a multi-year extension through 2028. So Oscar was contracted up until the end of next year, so 2026 season, but now he will be Lando's long-term teammate and probably long-term aggressor now, just with some of the comments that the boys are making going into the season. I don't think Papaya rules are going to be a thing this year.
Well, we like to hear that because we've got an Aussie in the seat. I'll tell you what, if he manages to get another Aussie out of a job, Lando Norris will be public enemy number 1 next time he lands in Melbourne.
Well, that's right. Look, we like Aussies are an endangered species in Formula One over the last couple of years. Like, while we have additionals this year, that one is in danger, as we've mentioned many times. So Jack Doohan, I hope you make it through the season, mate. But like, I'm not hopeful.
Yeah, F1's done some good things by Aussies, but they, even pushing, the makeshift Aussie Valtteri Bottas to being a reserve driver as well. They're on thin ice.
They really are. So Oscar getting a contract extension is the best news we've had for a little while in terms of Australia in this sport.
It certainly is. When we look at other countries in this sport that are trying to have some influence, the Americans are trying to weave their way in. We saw what's happened with Haas. They've built their way in and then faded their way out and then come back again. But Cadillac, we talked about this a couple of months ago when it was first, I guess, confirmed but not confirmed, but now it is official.
Yeah, so
Cadillac will be part of it.
So previously it was just an in-principle agreement. Things have been signed now, so everything has happened, like all the commercial assessments have happened. The application has now been approved. Cadillac will be on the grid in 2026. So with the new regulations, they will be coming to join the party.
Exciting times, but that means that we go to 11 teams, which means that there's 2 new seats, which is very exciting times for a lot of people. There's a lot of views on how they will go about this Cadillac. They would ideally, you think, love to have some sort of American-ish influence on it, but there's also the piece of you can't just put a couple of rookies in cars and hope that they're going to go okay in your first year. So you'd have to think they might find a balance of Yank talent and experience.
That's right. So I think, I think as a development team, they're going to need to have a old hand, like doing the development of the car, and then have that US talent. So like when we think of US talent, I genuinely think Colton Herta is probably the guy that's going to be in the box seat. But then we need to look at that older statesman driver, like someone who can develop a car. So that's when your Valtteri Bottas's, your Kevin Magnussen's, and dare we say it, your Daniel Ricciardo's come into the picture. Zhou Guan Yu's name has been getting thrown around. And it's just an exciting time for the sport. something I was thinking about pretty detailed about this is like how to best utilize that old driver. So I think what they need to do is they need to sign the young gun, work out the type of car that he works really well with, and then find an experienced driver that likes the same type of car. Because that way you'll avoid something like what happened with Lando and Danny a few years ago, where Lando's preferred car, which McLaren was very much on the development track for, didn't work for Daniel. So therefore, like the development of that car probably stalled a little bit because of that. Whereas if you get two drivers with a similar style who like a similar car, get the old hand who knows Formula One, and get the new guy from America that can really like bring excitement to the sport.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one. I personally think K-Mag's actually a really good fit. He knows American racing. He knows America really well. He's worked in an American team with Haas. It'll be interesting to see, then, what they go with that American talent, as you say. There's a couple of American names that have been thrown around that, it could be anywhere. There could be something quite left field in terms of some of the, open seat racing with IndyCar and different things. But, have you got a view where that comes from? There's some young guns and some stars on the rise in America that could be picked up.
Yeah, so Colton's probably the primary one, but you do have all those open wheel series that are happening across America. So there's plenty of motorsport there to sort of pick and choose from.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing how it continues. It'll put some pressure on some teams and some individuals as they perform around different pieces. I'd just like to see, why don't they go a little bit left field and sign Ricky Bobby, If you ain't first, you are.
Look, given Ricky Bobby's opinion of the Formula One drivers in that movie, that's probably not the best move, but at the same time, it could be an entertaining one.
Certainly would be entertaining. That and what else, do Americans love if not some publicity? But maybe they just get him to do some of the livery reveals or something. That could be quite a fun time.
That's a play, actually. That's a good call. Like getting Will Ferrell just involved in an ambassadorial role, like just to be like their guy, like who speaks to the media about the team. That's how you play this. He needs to do it in character as Ricky Bobby.
Oh, 100% with the full Wonder White suit on and all, and the hands up here. That's what we want to see. What we will see in the coming days is the launch of the 2025 season, and it's back where it belongs, JR. It's back in Melbourne. Australia is ready to rock and roll for the first Grand Prix of the season.
We certainly are. It's the first time since 2020 that it's been scheduled to be hosted in Australia. So back to its rightful place at Albert Park. Last couple of years, we've had like the late night sort of starts of the season. This time we get a nice prime time, 3 p.m. Local time for us to be watching the race. And it's very exciting. Like as you can see on screen, we've got sort of 4 drivers to watch there. Like we've got Jack Doohan on his Australian Formula One debut. He has actually done a single race. Piastri on the back of that contract extension, and then the rivalry between Max Verstappen, who's still at Red Bull, and Lewis Hamilton making his debut for Ferrari.
Jeez, he looks good in red, doesn't he?
Look, he's definitely, like, in terms of the fashion, he's definitely lapping up that red. In terms of lapping that car, testing was interesting. Like, we touched on it last week. He seemed to just be, like, keeping step with Leclerc. So, like, he's adjusted that car, like, surely. Will he adjust to the fact that it seems like every radio call is by committee at Ferrari? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I think he's going to have some trouble learning the different politics there, but we will wait and see. And I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I'm going to go out on a limb and actually say I actually think Piastri is going to stage a bit of an upset here. We know that he's some of his best results in the early parts of the season, if we look at them in exclusion, have been in Australia previously. We know he has performed well here, obviously in front of the home fans. Look, no offense to Jack Doohan, I'm not expecting too much from him. But yeah, I think Oscar, and we'll come to me catching a bit of Formula One fever this week already in a little bit. But that might be a hint as to who the big celebrity I saw tipped as well. Yeah,
so Oscar's definitely an informed driver right now, and he can make that upset happen. And if he knocks Lando off the track, that's even better because we'd love to see an Australian even just scoring points in Australia.
Yeah, we certainly would. We'd love to see him do a little better than his 4th place finish last year. If he could finish on the podium, it'd be great, but maybe a win. It's certainly going to be enthralling. Sunday, it is all happening. It's getting it underway. And yeah, as I said, it's a huge F1 season. I think it's more open than we've seen in recent years, JR. Certainly heading into this first race, I think you could probably make a case for. Look, I think it'd be drawing a long bow to suggest that Lewis would win, but I wouldn't. You can't rule out Lewis Hamilton either. But realistically, there's probably 5 drivers at least that you can make a genuine case for that they might be a chance to win before we see people on track on the weekend.
Absolutely. Speaking of seeing people, you during the week got to do something that I'm quite envious of, and here in Newcastle, you got to go and see the great man himself, Haas's former team principal, Gunther Steiner. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Well, it was really entertaining. He had his ghostwriter with him hosting the session. He took questions from the crowd. He was a little selective about how he answered some of them, including one of the questions, which was, which team principal would you most like to punch and why is it Christian Horner? He kind of stepped around that one, but obviously has to step around a few things as well, as with any separation in this sort of world. There's been some agreements and commercial settlements that mean he can't say too much about Haas, but he certainly gave us some very strong opinions on one former driver from Haas who might or might not be of Russian heritage and his dad, which was entertaining. But he was, as you can imagine, he was an engaging, enthralling speaker, took us through the whole journey from his early days and working with Colin McRae, which is phenomenal in itself, to everything that he's done in F1, meeting Nicky Lauda, working for Nicky Lauda, starting an F1 team because, now it's easy to get a license. And then apparently the F1 reaching out to him, or the FIA, reaching out to him in recent years to sort of say, so exactly what was the process we made you go through when you got the license for Haas when they were trying to put Cadillac through their paces, which was quite funny, but very FIA.
Yeah.
It was really good. And yeah, to that point, he was talking about the race ahead, and he sees that, he thinks there's a really big chance of Piastri upstaging Norris. He genuinely thinks that Piastri is going to be there and thereabouts in a number of races, and the Aussie track and Aussie crowd will obviously suit him. So, it was interesting. Some of the other drivers they talked about. He didn't seem to have a lot of faith in Lance Stroll's driving ability. I don't know why that would be.
Yeah, Lance Stroll's driving ability, I don't see a major reason to sort of question that, other than the fact that he's crashed so many cars over these years.
Yeah, so that was quite good. He regaled us with a bit of a reenactment of the smashed door incident with Romain and was that Mick or Kev when they took each other out. All these sorts of ones. I think it was K-Mag actually. But yeah, so it was quite entertaining, and lots of fooks in there as well, of course.
I was about to ask, what was his swear count looking like? Was it as long? It was a couple of hour show, so it had to have gone into triple figures.
No, he was pretty well behaved. I think that's the thing, and we'll talk about Drive to Survive in a moment. But I think that's the thing is Drive to Survive painted a picture, right? It painted some rivalries that weren't necessarily rivalries, and he talked about that. He and Mick Schumacher, he said, look, we had a great relationship. He goes, the guy needed a mentor. He should have, had more support around him. He didn't want that. He was happy to have an entourage that were yes people. And that's a concern. Most of these other drivers, including his father, have had mentors. And, it's one of those pieces that, helps people succeed is to have someone who's experienced around them and in their ear. Let's look at Oscar. He's got Mark Webber in his corner, right? Which, can't be a bad thing. So these sorts of pieces are really key. So, it was certainly interesting. His view on Drive to Survive, he said, it's kind of crazy how it blew up his personality and blew up, obviously it's the bits that they get clicked through on, and, it's the bits that get attention. But again, it's drawn a lot of eyes, and to be fair, the age range and gender split of the crowd, a couple of nights ago was huge. It was, I would say 45, 55 women to men. So there was still more men there, but there was a lot of couples there. I was there with my partner. It was very much my wife, I should say, very much a real spread of society, which just talks to the appeal that Drive to Survive has delivered. And on that note, as I said, Drive to Survive is obviously out. Lots of people have watched all of it already. The first few episodes, I know you're not a Drive to Survive man. You're an F1 purist, JR, so you don't want to sell out to the man.
In all honesty, I'm not a reality TV watcher. I think is probably the biggest thing. I love Formula One. I'll watch 2 hours either side of the broadcast, to get all those stories, but I don't need it in a serialized format.
Yeah, I understand that, but I also, it's been a gateway drug to expansion and explosion, and for me, and my wife's a great example of that. She had an enthralling time last night going and watching Gunther, but it was one of those things that, I said to her about, this Drive to Survive, it might be worth watching when it came first season, and obviously COVID and all those fun things. And then it became now she's engaged because those people that didn't have a reason to engage with the purity of the sport have engaged with the personalities of the sport. And let's be honest, we talked about some of those guys, Danny Rick, Valtteri Bottas, K-Mag, these sorts of guys. There's some quirky and cool personalities that will allow people to engage that would engage on a different level. Those people that are, more personality and character driven, and they won't be a Ferrari fan. They will be a Lewis fan. They will follow Lewis wherever he goes, or they'll follow Danny Rick wherever he goes, including to a vineyard to make some wine.
It's a fine looking rosé so far.
That was actually one of the funnier comments last night. One of the questions is which person from the F1 paddock would you most likely, if you had to go on a piss up with one of them? And Danny Rick's name was the first out of his mouth.
No questions, just top of mind. Like he's already thought about it.
Yeah, correct. He's just waiting to taste that rosé by the sound of it. So, look, on Drive to Survive this season, it's been interesting. The first focus is Christian Horner, obviously, and all the wonderful things that went on around, the allegations around, his infidelity and things. So that was interesting. He called Zach Brown some names because Zach Brown, in a public press conference basically said, these people have got to be held to account. You can't bring the sport into disrepute. I don't think Zach Brown has a problem making enemies. But yeah, so it's been interesting. We've seen a bit of a focus on Lando as well and what he's doing. I'm about halfway through the season. Hasn't caught me as much as some of the other seasons, but I don't know if that's just, the challenge of excelling beyond the previous season. So certainly tune in if F1's not something you've gotten into before. Tune into the race, have a look at Drive to Survive, and you might attach yourself to some of the personalities, or might just give you some people that you just don't really like. That's the other thing that it's done for me, is it's really just exacerbated for me certain individuals that I'm not a fan of, and certain individuals that I am.
Look, I don't think it can make me dislike Lando or Lance anymore at this stage. So maybe I will check it out this year.
Look, the last few seasons have certainly made me dislike Lance's dad more. So anyway, just teach your kid how to ride his bike. I mean, he's drive his car. But JR, look, that brings us a wrap, mate. Have you got a prediction? Anything outrageous for this season or this race that you want to get on the record book so that we can come back and laugh at how stupid we were later in the year?
Look, I think you're right with Oscar upset win, upset for the rest of the Formula One world, but win for all Australians. And then I'm actually going to put it out there, perhaps a Lewis and then a Max podium. So, seeing that sort of thing, I think the rivalry between, if things go right, the rivalry between Max and Lewis will exist again this year.
I like it. A question I've got for you, any first-time winners this year on the grid?
First-time winners this year on the grid. Look, it's not going to be any of our rookies. If it was to be, it would be Antonelli. He'd probably be the only person, with the hardware to do it this year. In terms of other first-time winners, look, I'm really not sure.
It's an interesting one. Some would argue that Oscar's got the he's got the wins on the board, right? But it'd be interesting to see how he goes becoming a consistent performer. Someone I'd love to see break their drought, which obviously a number of podiums a couple of years ago. But I'd love to see Fernando Alonso back on the podium every now and then. I don't know whether we will, but just it's a great story if he does.
So here's the thing. I don't think we're going to see too much of Fernando this year. We're going to see, we'll see him in that top 5 area, this year. Next year is when Fernando becomes someone to watch, where we're going to end up with Adrian Newey putting that car together for him throughout the year. And we've had reports this week that Newey has had a bedroom set up at the headquarters of Aston Martin. That way he can work during the night when necessary. So, all the things are coming into place for that car to be an absolute flyer next year.
You know what I find really crazy, and you talked about Antonelli before. Antonelli was about 3 years from being born when Fernando Alonso won his first race.
It's true. It is true. And he's the youngest, and Piastri and a few of these other guys aren't far off.
Well, George Russell looks like an old man compared to Antonelli. That was the latest episode of Drive to Survive, which was interesting. But yeah, the 2003 Hungarian Grand Prix, if my memory serves me correctly. And to give you a bit of an idea, the other people on the podium that day, Kimi Räikkönen and Juan Pablo Montoya.
That makes sense.
But winding back the clock, I was still in high school. Ralph Schumacher was also qualified second.
Yeah, right. So yeah, we're going to even 2003. I'm barely out of high school at this point.
Well, to be fair, there was a Verstappen in the race though. There was a Schumacher in the race. There was 2 Schumachers in the race. So a Trulli. There was some names.
Jensen, do we have Jensen at this point?
Anthony Button, yeah.
Yeah.
Olivia Panis. Nick Heidfeld, there's some
Yeah,
names.
okay, yeah, no, I'm recognizing most of these from like
That's all right.
when I first got into Formula One, really.
Rubens Barrichello.
There's a driver
that
there's a character that there's your Denny Rick of that era.
he certainly was. He certainly was in the early days. So, mate, a big thank you. We can't wait to get into the F1 this weekend. I look forward to recapping it with you next week. And it's going to be an amazing season. I think it's, as I said, there's 5 or 6 drivers who are going to be up and amongst it. And if they can all get off to a flying start, we're going to have a great year.
Excellent.
Well, moving on from the rubber on the road in the F1, and we're going to head over to the soccer, the round ball action. And today we're missing Mr. Consistent Lockie Abel. He's not with us. He's otherwise engaged, but we've found a very capable and able man to jump online and talk football with us. Harry Scobie from Newey Jets Football. Harry, you on debut, mate. Good to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to be here, and it makes it even better that the Jets just got up as well.
I was going to say, you would absolutely be on a high. The Newey Jets are flying. So 7 in a row without defeat. They played Auckland on the weekend in a thriller at home. They couldn't get away from that without a share of the points, but certainly no loss to the ladder leaders. And then a win over Melbourne City. They are just absolutely doing everything they can to try and claw their way towards finals.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a stressful few weeks, but as the Jets fans know, we've stuck through each other. We've come together as a family these last few weeks and really helped the lads get over the line. And the performances have been incredible. We've had to work till the end. We've had to work really hard, but it just shows the crowd numbers are increasing, and it's a really big buzz here in the Hunter at the minute.
Yeah, we can't wait to see what sort of crowd turns out this weekend as they take on Western United, but we'll get to the weekend ahead shortly. So, Harry, on top of your Newey Jets football pages that everyone can find on most of the good social media, on YouTube, on Instagram, and on TikTok, you're doing a bit of work with the Jets, the club as well. And one of the benefits of that is you had absolutely the best seat in the house to one of the best goals we've seen in recent times, certainly since Topple Stanley at McDonald Jones Stadium, but in the competition this season, I think, from Eli Adams on the weekend.
Yeah, Eli's certainly known for scoring great goals, and he produced another one on the weekend. I think it was goal of the week, if I'm right, as well, which we actually saw some really good goals last round as well. So, Eli, incredible. And just the way he ran to the fans, I thought that showed, sort of where the club's at the minute, that togetherness. And like you mentioned, the footage I captured was unreal. But as you mentioned, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to work with the Jets and capture moments like that. But it was definitely special being able to grab that on film for sure.
It was awesome, mate. You did well. You managed to capture all of the emotion and Eli launching himself into the squadron, which was great to see. We talked about it there. Auckland, obviously the pace setters at the moment, but we've got those Melbourne sides. They just keep on winning, and we can see them all climbing the ladder. They're chasing down Auckland. We talked about Newcastle. They're trying to chase down the likes of Sydney and Western Sydney for that 6th spot. But this top of the table, it's starting to get a little bit congested as Auckland have dropped a couple of points in recent weeks. The Victorian sides are doing quite well.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Auckland are a bit hit and miss. They started the season really well, and they've, sort of been one of the more consistent sides. Look at Adelaide, they're sort of dropped off a bit compared to where they were a couple of weeks ago. I mean, we were really looking at an Auckland-Adelaide title race, but that seems to have faded away. And like you mentioned, Auckland again dropping points to McDonald Jones Stadium. But yeah, going back to the Melbourne teams, like you mentioned, victory with quite a convincing win on the weekend. And this is nothing against the Mariners, obviously being our rivals, but I think they're in a bit of trouble at the minute, the Mariners. So I think it was a comprehensive display from Melbourne Victory, and then Melbourne City, prior to this game tonight, picking up points as well. So it's good for both Melbourne teams. I actually think Victory the one to watch more than City. I think they're really dangerous in attack. Star-studded attack. You got players coming off the bench as well that have a great impact. So Victory, the ones for me to look out for come this back end of the season. But yeah, title races are certainly heating up, and Auckland, dropping points against Jets the other week, which wouldn't have been what they would have wanted.
No, Steve Corica touched on that in his post-game press conference, that they were a little bit startled, even though they knew the Jets were going to come at them hard, and he was happy enough with how they handled it. But again, that gap is whittling away. I mean, in reality, it's 7 points because they've got a game in hand on Western United. The other thing to note on this ladder is this was pre-Newcastle's win over Melbourne City. So Melbourne goal difference will be back to 9. It won't change where they sit on the ladder, nor will it change where the Jets sit on the ladder, but they're now equal with points with Macarthur, which will become really crucial in a couple of weeks when the Jets do play Macarthur. And they've got, after a big game against Western United, which we'll get into shortly, some interesting ones to come. It's certainly alive. When you look at the Jets now, there's 10 points between second and ninth, with teams having anywhere from six to seven games basically to play on the way home. A lot of those teams above Newcastle, and in all of those Melbourne teams now only have 6 games in their hand. So we'll wait and see what happens from an Auckland point of view. They would have been very happy with the Jets getting the points over Melbourne City, though.
Yeah, I think they mentioned it on the commentary call. Auckland, it seems like they've been keeping an eye on a lot of games just to make sure they are extending that lead at the top. They've had to do it the tricky way, but certainly would have been pleased with Newcastle's performance tonight. It wasn't pretty, but they hold on. They get the 3 points. It's a clean sheet as well against the City side who know how to score goals. So positives all around for Newcastle and most certainly for Auckland as well.
Yeah, certainly. I think we can put a line through those bottom 4 to your point just before, and we'll undoubtedly talk about 12th and 13th a little bit later on. Let's switch tacks, Harry. Let's have a chat about the women's as well. I know you've been working on their games for the Jets as well, and look, they haven't exactly been thriving this season. They had a bit of a tough run, but back-to-back wins. They're moving forward. But the team that impressed me on the weekend, Wellington, they looked done and dusted a couple of weeks ago, but they managed with another key win to keep their season alive.
Yeah, I think for the Phoenix this season, their home record hasn't been too bad. I think away from home, they've had a few disappointing results, but like you mentioned, they've got in there. It doesn't matter how they get the job done. They've got it done, and they're continuing to pick up 3 vital points towards the back end of the season. That's what you want. Like, you want to, it doesn't matter how the job gets done. If you're in a position that you want to make the finals, you just want to be consistently stringing out wins. And I think that's what the Phoenix have done. And credit to them because, like you mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, they were in the dumps. And I think that's probably a similar position with the Jets men's as well. So it just shows, what a bit of consistency can do towards the back end of the season. And they're certainly alive in the dub top race for the finals as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting race when we have a look at that ladder. You've got Western United, who at their best can beat almost anyone.
Yeah.
Then down to Wellington. That's essentially the congestion fighting for finals now, remembering that the women just played 22 games. So Brisbane have got an extra game in hand because of the wonderful work of Cyclone Alfred, postponing their game against Melbourne City. But then all those other teams, essentially 3 or 4 games, and that's the wild thing at the moment. You could finish 4th, which means you get a home semi-final, depending on the results over the next 2 to 3 weeks if you're Wellington. But if you're Western United or Brisbane, you could also finish 7th or 8th and miss the finals quite easily. So it's going to be an exciting last few rounds.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the dubs are always like this, to be fair. I think it's always congested come the back end of the season. And that ladder, like you look at 4th and 8th pretty much, there's not much in it at all. So you could be a team that's sitting 4th and finish the season on 8th. So it's going to be exciting. Can't take your eyes off the action because the top 4 isn't certainly locked in at this point. And I think there's teams who deserve to be in there who will eventually miss out. So definitely something to keep an eye on come the back end of the season. But I think both title races will be good, men's and women's. I think it'll be keen. I'm keen to see who will make the finals in both competitions.
It's certainly going to be interesting. The top 3 sides all undefeated in the last 5 games, which is pretty significant. As I said, the Jets with a couple of wins. Perth have had a couple of wins in their last 3, but they've left it a little bit too late, those sides, unfortunately. Let's have a look at the games this week, Harry, and we'll get your thoughts on a couple of these. There's some games here that Central Coast, they're sitting just inside the top 6. They've got to win this one on Friday night.
Yeah, I know. I think it's the same case with a lot of teams. But for the Central Coast, I'm actually been impressed with them this season. I think they've been really good, especially, in that F3 derby, 5-1 winners against the Jets. But I think just some really quality plays in that team. They just haven't been able to be consistent, but it's do or die this weekend for the Coasties. And, with the way the men's are going at the moment, I think Mariners fans will be hoping that, that their women's side can make the finals to give them something to cheer about because we're used to seeing the Mariners being in and around the finals. So if both men's and women's miss out this year, I think it'll be quite frustrating for them and it's a must win on Friday night for sure. But a tricky game as well.
It will be a tricky game, as you say. Perth have won 2 of their last 3. The Mariners have lost all of their last 3. Another one that's really key, Canberra United sitting just outside the finals race on Friday night. They come up against Western United. I think this Friday night is a lot where it comes down to in terms of the finals competition. But again, we know both these teams on their day can absolutely put it to anyone. Canberra took it to Melbourne City only a couple of weeks ago. Western United, we've seen the best and worst of them this year. It's why they're sitting fourth on the ladder but have a -8 goal difference.
Yeah, you're definitely right about Western. 1 week they can really show up. Next week, they're not good at all. So this is another game, like you mentioned, Friday night for anyone who's not doing anything. Keep your eye on the dub because this is a crucial weekend in terms of the top 4 race for the dub. In this game, I think Canberra may cause an upset, just because I think confidence may be a bit low within the Western squad at the moment. And Canberra haven't been bad this season, and I don't mind going for a little upset. So I'm going to think that Canberra will push on and continue to be in the hunt for the finals and get a win here.
It's a nice story, Canberra. We obviously know all the dramas they've gone through with trying to make sure they keep this team afloat and working towards potentially, maybe, hopefully one day getting a men's team. But in the meantime, it's good to see them going well. And obviously Michelle Heyman, Maya Markovsky, they've got some talent there, especially up front. But let's move down the weekend a little bit further, and I know it's going to hurt you, but we're going to have to brush over the Newcastle game because there's 2 other games here that are very key. Saturday at 5 o'clock, Sydney hosting Wellington. We saw Sydney against Newcastle. They were barely able to beat time with a stick. They have not looked good this year. Ante Uric has all sorts of dramas. Meanwhile, we just talked about Wellington. They know they need to keep winning. If they could win this game, they could potentially sit as high as 4th or 5th at the end of the weekend.
Yeah, and I think with this game, the biggest thing will be is one team's got something to play for. Actually, to be fair, both teams are playing for something because Sydney are trying to, leap from the wooden spoon, and Wellington are trying to make the final. So, we talk about games that will decide the top 4, but this game can also decide the wooden spoon as well in a way. So, really keen to keep an eye on this one. And like you mentioned, Sydney, it just hasn't been their year this year. They've been really, really struggling, which is not like Sydney FC. We're not used to seeing them do this, but I think for them, they're at home, they're playing to get off the bottom of the ladder, and Wellington are playing for finals. So it shapes up to be really intriguing. And I think just with the more motivation within the Wellington squad at the moment, I think they'll pick up a win away from home against the Sky Blues.
Look, we always, as guys, and we're a bit biased at the moment with two Newcastle crew on. But, we always like to see the Sky Blues copping a knock, but we'll wait and see how that one pans out. The really interesting one, though, 4 o'clock on Sunday, Melbourne City versus Adelaide. Melbourne City looking to continue this undefeated season. And look, you'd be a brave man, Harry, to say that, you see them losing. But this game's a dangerous one. Adelaide have snuck up under the radar a little bit here. Everyone's been watching Melbourne City, Melbourne Victory, even Western United at points. Brisbane were up there for a little while. Adelaide have just crept up through the ranks. They've won 4 of their last 5. This is an ominous game. I'm favouring Melbourne City here. They've got the ability just to strangle games and then make sure they get a point out of them. But the other thing is they also know that if Melbourne Victory win on the weekend and they draw, they will be level on competition points. So amazing to think that a team that's lost 2 games and a team that's gone undefeated could be level on points after the season if the undefeated team remains undefeated. But that's the position we sit in.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think with this one, Adelaide picked up a good 1-0 win last week, but this City side are just so well drilled across the whole of the pitch. They don't lack in any areas, whether that be defence or going forward. They just all know their roles. They're well drilled, well coached, as I mentioned earlier. But like you said, Adelaide are sort of that team who no one's really talking about, and they're just sort of going about their business, picking up points here and there, and they've been able to sneak up slowly into that top 8 sort of area. And I think in this one, like you mentioned, it'd be hard to go against City, especially at home as well, I believe. So I think that City will get it done again. I really rate them as a team. We're used to seeing them and Sydney FC usually fighting for that top spot, but this season City have just been really impressive, and backing them to get it done this weekend.
Yeah, certainly have been impressive. And, I think sometimes we look at stats like who's the top goal scorer and, you look at that list and Melbourne City have only got their highest is in equal 4th. But the one that stands out for me is when you look at the top assist list in the A-League dub, the top 3 players, Rihanna Policina, Lords Bosch and Mariana Speckmeyer, all play for Melbourne City, which just talks about how well they play as a team and as a unit. They share it around in terms of the goal scoring up front. And a big part of that's been a number of players being absent at different points on Matildas and international duty. So it's going to be huge. Before we wrap, Harry, we've got to have a look at the men's round ahead, and there's plenty of interesting games as well. We can see at the top there, we can chalk that one off. Tick, job done for Rob Stanton and his boys, 3 points. A game that will have some influence for Newcastle because if Adelaide could win this game by 2 or more goals, Newcastle will actually climb above Macarthur on the ladder on Friday night. How bizarre is that? The boys could be sitting at home on Friday and be moving up the ladder thanks to Adelaide doing a job, which the way Macarthur are at the moment, you wouldn't put it past Adelaide to bang 3 or 4 past them Friday night at Coopers. We know it's a tough place.
Yeah, most certainly. I think Macarthur in a lot of trouble. I think, with the losses of, RAFPL, Jed Drew, they've just been missing. They're not scoring goals, and also the defence, they're not renowned for their amazing defence as well. So for me, the Bulls are really struggling. I think Marin Yakulis is probably that only player that could sort of spark something within their squad. But other from that, they're not the same squad they were at the start of the season. I remember round 1, they won 6-1 against Perth, and we thought, this team's going to be incredible. But they've slowly fallen off, and that's what the season can do. It's not about the first couple of rounds. It's how the rest of the season pans out. And Adelaide at home have also had some of their own troubles lately, so they'll be keen to bounce back. And like you mentioned, Coopers is a tricky place for anyone to go. I just think with the Bulls low on confidence at the minute, I think Adelaide should get this one done. I'm hoping Archie Goodwin can get back on the score sheet because it's been a while, and I back him, and it'd be good for the Jets as well. It'd be amazing.
It's a key game, as you said. Adelaide have slipped from form a little bit. 4 games without a win. Macarthur, I think they've forgotten about winning. But while we're talking Macarthur, I'm not sure if you saw the story with the Asian Champions League Elite 2 during the week with Valère Germain, who's headed over to
Did see that.
and they had their points stripped from them because he was ineligible.
Yeah. I briefly saw it. You probably know more than me about it, but I believe Germain scored a couple of weeks ago, and then they've had something to do with points deduction, which is not great for them. But and just the Germain's Bulls, I mean, that they are really struggling. But I did see that come up, which was quite funny.
Yeah, so they were up against Lion City Sailors, and there was a 6-1.
That's it. Yeah.
And now it's been handed as a 3-0 win because he scored the 5th goal, as you said, coming off the bench on debut.
Yeah.
But he was ineligible as he was supposed to be serving a 3-game suspension that was imposed on him. So anyway, it's never a dull moment. Very entertaining world football, but just a nice little footnote. I'm sure the A-League referees were having a bit of a chuckle after Valère gave them an absolute spray on his way out the door of the A-League. Yeah. What a tantrum that was. Let's talk other games here. There's plenty of games with finals implications. Western Sydney versus Melbourne Victory is a huge one of those. Western Sydney sitting in 6th, Melbourne Victory in 4th. These teams know they need to keep winning, and I know Wanderers are a great example. They've won 4 of their last 5. They haven't lost in their last 5 games. But at the end of the day, not everyone can keep winning here, so there's got to be some slips, which is going to create some opportunities. The thing's going to be you don't want to be the team, affording other teams those opportunities by slipping.
Yeah, I think this one will be definitely one to keep an eye on because Western Sydney are a team who have been inconsistent, but like you mentioned, they've sort of found a way to just sneak their way up the ladder. They've won those lower crucial games. They're scoring goals. They're banging in goals. It hasn't really been Brandon Borrello who's banging him in as well. There's other players across the park that are contributing to Western Sydney's success, but they'll know they have to be up for it on Saturday night because they've got red hot victory, and both attacks are going to be the key for me in this one. I think both teams have really good players that can influence the game, and I think this one being a Saturday night as well, which is obviously the main game, hopefully the Wanderers can pack it out, but this can have a huge impact on the top 6 and the way that ends up as well. So if you ask me for my score prediction, I'm going to go for 2-2 because I think both teams have the potential to be lethal in front of goal, and there could be goals in this one for sure.
There certainly could be goals, and I think they've got plenty of attacking prowess. When you talk about Wanderers, Sapsford's got 7 this year, Milanovic 8. They're leading the way for them. It's not necessarily the avenues that we expected were going to provide them for Wanderers, but they are the top scoring team in the league with 43 goals. The defence, possibly a little bit concerning, but they're not the only team with that issue. Lots of teams around them having conceded a similar number of goals. So it'll be interesting to see. It's a key game that's going to have a lot of implications for how this finals race plays out across the final 6 or 7 games for these teams. And we're really going to start to see that picture shape up. The other one that we talked about before, and it's going to see this picture shape up, is Newcastle versus Western United. Newcastle in really good form. Western United have got 3 wins on the trot, but Newcastle now 7 games without defeat. It has been a long time since a Newcastle side has managed to execute that.
Yeah, I think Ben Homer mentioned on the call earlier, just the way they've been able to see out games has just been crucial. Despite the 1-1 draw against Auckland last week, we look at some of the wins later on in the season that they sort of didn't have early in the year. I think we look at Perth Glory, the 2-2 draw at home. We look at Sydney FC, those games where we really had control and had the lead, but just coming home with the 1 point instead of the 3, for example. And that's had an impact on where they are in the ladder right now. But they've certainly found some form. And credit to John Aloisi and Western United as well. I think they should be given praise for what they're doing at the minute. Second on the ladder. And yeah, they're in town this weekend against a red hot Newcastle side. So, as a Newcastle fan, I'm confident that we can go out. Like Rob Stanton mentions, a lot of times we don't care who we're playing, where they are on the ladder. We've proven that we can beat the likes of Adelaide United, Melbourne Victory, Melbourne City. And to be fair, probably should have beat Auckland on the weekend as well. So it's a tough one, but I think at home, let's hope a healthy crowd and the Jets can get it done. But for Western, I think they should be given a lot of praise for what they've done. They've got some really young talent coming through, and it'll be good to see Angus Sergate return to Newcastle as well, former Jets player.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't have too good of a homecoming. Gussie. I did hear Ben Homer talking about him and waxing lyrically about him during the lightning delay in the game when they were on Melbourne City. Interestingly enough, I was just doing a bit of stat gathering before this game, and did you know that the last time that Newcastle haven't gone 7 games undefeated in the last 10 years. So even the year that we hosted the grand final, I believe that we didn't go 7 games undefeated. So that's a pretty phenomenal stat to think about. Maybe if we didn't have quite the sluggish start to the season, we might be in a better spot. But again, we are now sitting, right up there and chasing these spots. Looking at what we can come up with here. We're on 25 points, just 6 points adrift of Western Sydney. So it is game on. We're going to need to win a lot of games with the Newcastle team, but we'll wait and see. A team that can get in the way of that, though, Sydney FC, they'll be looking to make sure they bag 3 points at home on Sunday night against Wellington. Again, a Wellington team that's sort of gone on the drift. They've lost 4 in a row, and I think after seeing Chiefy's press conference the other day, he might have just about given up and he's about ready to walk out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of Wellington Mariners. They've sort of been the teams that have fall off for me. I think they both had bright starts to the season, but like I mentioned earlier, it just shows that the season isn't about how you're progressing halfway through. It's how you sort of come towards the back end of the season. And like you mentioned, Chiefy and the Phoenix. I mean, we talk about teams being in trouble. They are conceding a hell of a lot of goals. And yeah, they have all the right to be frustrated at the minute. I think they haven't won any of the Kiwi derbies, if I'm right. I think Auckland have beat them 3-0 in all of those. So frustration's growing for the Knicks, and I don't see them beating Sydney on Sunday night, I believe, at Allianz. So I think the Sky Blues will get it done in this one, and Wellington continue to slip down that ladder.
They certainly do. It's one of those interesting pieces, so we'll wait and see what they can do. It goes turnabout. They both had really good years last year. We know that. Wellington's struggling as the little brothers, but all we know is that the race is heating up. These games are absolute belters. So, it's a really good time to be in the A-League and being around the A-League for yourself and I. So, certainly get around it. And of course, the other thing you can get around is your content, Newey Jets football. But mate, the last thing before we go, I did want to just touch on quickly is this rumor that's around at the moment that Liverpool might be coming to Melbourne. It's it's pretty crazy when you think about where Liverpool are at the moment in terms of EPL. They've got it by the throat and they're dominating all comers. Maybe not so much in the Champions League, but we might leave that alone. Yeah, it's a huge piece if Liverpool were to come to the MCG. It'd be nicer if they came to Sydney or somewhere, but we'll let the MCG. They've got the biggest stadium.
Yeah, I was hoping you weren't going to bring up the Champions League, but we'll let that one slide. Frustrating result this morning as a Reds fan, but I think what Liverpool have done this season would be incredible. And I think, I was actually thinking about it a couple of weeks ago, whether this would fall over the line if the Adelaide All-Stars would continue this year. And by all rumours, it is going ahead. So we'll wait for confirmation. But yeah, it would be incredible, especially with the way Liverpool have performed this season. Like as a fan myself, you look at Arnie Slot coming into the role in his first year and doing all this success that fans wouldn't have expected he would do this well. So for them to finish the season by hopefully winning the Premier League and then coming across the MCG. It would be incredible, and I think it'd be interesting to see who's picked for the All Stars team as well. Plenty of players up for selection for that as well. So yeah, really keen for it.
Yeah, I think someone who might be putting their hand up for that after the performances he's made since making his first appearances in Jets colours was that man that we just saw flashed up on the alongside the schedule before for the next round is Kotap Mizunuma. He's been an absolute superstar, and I think we'd love to see him crossing balls into some of the top strikers in the A-League.
Yeah. I can just see him putting balls in behind Van Dyke. But no, he's been incredible for the Jets, and obviously rested tonight against Melbourne City, but keen to have him back on the weekend because what an inclusion he's been to not only the Jets but the A-League as well.
Yeah, we love to see these players coming in and starring. Mate, speaking of starring, you've absolutely knocked it out of the park tonight, so a big thank you for coming on. We look forward to having you on again later in the season, and as I said, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Newey Jets Football, they can catch you, or they can catch you running around in a green bib at McDonald Jones Stadium getting all the up-close action shots after the Jets are scoring bangers.
Nah, yeah, a bit of both. It's been incredible to see the footage I've been able to get, and I think the results as well has come with it. So, incredible time to be a Jets fan, and thank you very much for having me on and for making this possible.
Well, what a show it's been. We've been to all sorts of corners of the sporting world. A big thank you to Harry Scobie from Newey Jets Football on debut. He's done a great job. We had Tim at Robbo Robinson carrying the heavy load this week in the absence of Brodie Burrows and Lockie Avil. So great to have Robbo on. JR Carter picking apart the motorsport. And, of course, Paul Dennett from Dennett on Cricket filling us in across the Champions Trophy and the Sheffield Shield and a little bit more. We look forward to having them all on again soon, and we look forward to having you back tuning in again soon to the black and white of all your sporting landscape. No grey opinions. We hope you enjoy the show. Make sure to put some feedback in the comments down below. If you haven't already subscribed on YouTube, make sure you do so. Hit the bell to get notifications. As we've said the last couple of weeks, you can catch us on Spotify now as well. So if you want to catch us on the go and it's a little bit easier to listen to the audio versus the video, jump onto Spotify, give us some feedback on there and subscribe there as well. And, of course, give us a follow on all of our social media channels. You can find us on TikTok. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And until next week, enjoy your sporting landscape. We look forward to chatting everything that we can come across with you again in 7 days.